When people think of number systems, they usually don't think about chakras or occultism. But I have been thinking about the possibility that different numbers could be linked to different levels of consciousness, and I've actually discovered some possible correlations to the number bases that people use and chakras. Now, I really don't know if I'm definitely not saying that if you use this base that you're suddenly going to become enlightened or anything like that, but I think it's possible that there is a correlation between certain states of consciousness and, believe it or not, oddly enough, number bases. And here is what that looks like. So the first correlation I've seen is base 10. And 10 is the number that is used in basic math bases. I've discovered that it, oddly enough, has 4 factors, which is like a square. You know how everything, in base consciousness is depicted like a square, and everything's, really small, sort of an analytical in a sense, and very simple. And the base chakra, sure enough, has 4 petals. This seems like a coincidence, and it very well could be, but it does make sense that base 10 is a base consciousness number, because everywhere you look, just about every culture on the planet uses a base 10. And that's basically just how math is typically, used in the first place. Just about every culture either uses base 10 or something that is similar to base 10, like 20 or 15 or 5 in some cases. Now, the second thing I've noticed is base 12. That's the baker's dozen, and there's a lot of people who advocate for base 12 or base 6, both of which are pretty relevant because they're a little bit higher up on the scale. Now, 12 is a baker's dozen, and sure enough, it has 6 factors. And you can see that's the reason why I say 6 is pretty relevant also. The factors of 12 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. I forgot to add a little bit of a something there to separate 4 and 6. Oddly enough, those are the 2 numbers, and I put it too low. It's almost like it's telling me something. But basically, that's the sacral chakra, and the sacral chakra is often related to food and other base desires. Sex is certainly one of the things it is often attributed to, and as we know, sex is primarily for reproduction, and what do hens do in order to reproduce? They lay eggs, 12 of which there tend to be within egg cartons, for example. The next thing that I've come up with is a little bit vague, but and it's a little bit stretchy, but it kind of works, and that is base 48. Now, you might have heard before that, sometimes, people will be given 48 hours to do something. 48 hours is a common, amount of time. There's certain colognes that are supposed to keep stink out of your arms for about 48 hours, and 48 hours is a common amount of time. And the number 48 is 2 of the 24 hours that it takes to make a full circle. So it's like 2 full circles. I'm not really sure what the number 2 could be referring to in this case, but I do know that it has 10 factors. And these factors are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16, and 24. The number 10 relating back to the solar plexus, respectively, which is said to have 10 petals. The solar plexus, of course, is commonly attributed to solar-like things like the sun and whatnot. It vaguely represents the sun, even though the sun is technically all the colors. It's also, you know, sort of points to yellow a little bit in a way, because that's sort of our perspective of the sun. And 48 or 24 is also our perspective of time. It takes the sun 48 hours to complete 2 circles around the sun. And I don't know what the significance of 2 days is, but I do know that this sort of vaguely works. 24, of course, is the, you know, if you can find any examples of what that might mean, you know, feel free to say something. But 24 is the 4th integer. It's 1 times 2 times 3 times 4. So this is double that, basically. The next thing I found was pretty interesting. There is the base 48, but there's also this base 60 number system. Now, this was used in Babylon in ancient times. And so this number is used as a base. It gave us our minutes in a day, again, referring back to time. Although, you know, this is a faster time. You know, there's 60 seconds in a minute, right? 12 factors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60. The number 12, respectively, being in accordance to the heart chakra. It makes sense that a heart would correspond to the 60th of a minute, because hearts beat really fast, obviously. If they don't, you might end up dead. And this next comparison is one of my own personal favorites, because it is my own personal favorite base because of how highly composite it is. This, of course, is the base 120. I represent this as life experience, because while I don't think our life necessarily has to be limited to 120, you know, I guess you could say years, it's definitely a full life experience, pretty much. You know, it's represented as a long life. You know, in Judaism, they'll tell you that 120 represents live long and prosper. Another interesting thing is that this has 16 factors. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20, 24, 60, 40, 60, 24, 30, 40, 60, and 120, right? The number 16, again, going back to chakras, there's 16 petals in the throat chakra. The number 16, or rather I should say the throat, represents communication. It's a very communicative base, because it is able to show you how many ones, twos, threes, fours, fives, sixes, and whatnot can be found within any given number. It's a very complex number. You'll notice that the higher consciousness beats in music, when they are used on objects like sand and whatnot, the more complex, the hertz is, the higher the hertz is, the more complex the shape will in fact be. This makes you think, though, what number could have two factors that could be better than 120? Because there's also the Christ chakra, and the which is two petals. Well, I got an interesting explanation for that. The explanation for the Christ chakra could be there are no bases that correspond with it. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, it's not that there's anything wrong with a base 120. There's nothing wrong with a base 60. There's nothing wrong with a base 48, or a base 12, or a base 10. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that numbers, just like any communication, when it's written down on paper as a representation, that's all it really is. So there's a duality between the representation of a number and the number itself. The ultimate goal in math is not merely to understand the nature of a base, but it is to understand the nature of that number. Understanding the nature of all numbers, baseless once in a while, can actually be a very good exercise. Try to imagine 70 as 70. Try to imagine 120 as just the number 120, not 120, but just the amount. Obviously, you can't do it very well because we're not that high consciousness yet. But the more we practice, the better we will become at doing these things. And this is the vibrational significance that I've noticed within numbers in systems that we use on a daily basis, the most common one being base 10, and I'm not against base 10, but I do think that it is a more basic base that's not as good as other bases like 12 or 48 or 60 or 120. At the end of the day, though, understanding the number is the main goal, not the base.